educate and inspire audiences to get involved and take action to protect our planet. For more information, visit bozemanfilmcelebration.com.
Possible by the Montana Department of Agriculture, the MSU Extension Service, the MSU Ag Experiment Stations of the College of Agriculture, the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, the Montana Bankers Association, Cashman Nursery and Landscaping, the Gallatin Gardeners Club, and the Rocky Mountain Certified Crop Advisor Program.
Good evening, folks. Welcome to another edition of Montana Ag Live, originating tonight from the studios at KUSM on the beautiful campus of Montana State University, and also from our homes in Montana. And tonight, a special guest will join us from North Dakota. I'm Jack Riesemann. I'll be your host this evening, retired professor of plant pathology. You know this story. If you provide the questions, we will try to provide the answers, and occasionally we'll throw a little commentary in too. Without your questions, this program is not very popular, but with your questions, hey, we have a lot of fun doing it. Let me introduce tonight's panel. Let me start off with Mary Burrows, who is joining me here in the studio this evening. Mary is the Extension Plant Pathologist and more recently Associate Director of the Montana Ag Experiment Station. Joining us via Zoom tonight, and I want to welcome her, Shannon Brent. Shannon is the Executive Vice President for the Northern Pulse Growers Association. And she'll tell us in a few moments what pulses are and what the Northern Pulse Growers Association does for producers. Eric Belasco. Eric has been on the program before. Eric is an economist. He has lots of answers for any of your questions. So as most economists, you ask the question and they will provide a good answer for you. And also tonight, Kevin McPhee. Kevin's been around both North Dakota and Montana. He is a pulse crop breeder. His job is to develop different types of peas, lentils, chickpeas that you as growers in the state of Montana and North Dakota can profit from. Answering the phones this evening will be Nancy Blake and Aaron Cruitt. Those questions will be sent to me via this cute little computer in front of me. It's called Slack technology. You ask them, or you provide them the question, and it will show up here on the screen, and I will direct it to the appropriate individual. Before we get started, Shannon, welcome again. Tell us a little bit about pulses, what they are, and what the Northern Pulse Growers Association does.
Sure, thank you, Jack. Pulses are the dry edible seeds of legume plants, and primarily what we're looking at with pulses in Montana and North Dakota are dry peas, lentils, chickpeas, and then we also do have some fava beans that are grown in North Dakota as well. The Northern Pulse Growers Association is a nonprofit association that works on behalf of the producers in North Dakota and Montana. Our board is made up of both Montana and North Dakota producers. We currently have Chris Westergaard from Dagmar, Montana, is the president of the organization. We have 10 board members from across the region. 6 of those represent districts in either Montana and North Dakota, and there are 3 that serve in at-large positions as well. And as an organization for producers across the region, we provide producer education, consumer education and marketing, research coordination. We do work with marketing on both the domestic and the international level, as well as providing advocacy for our producers across the region.
Well, thank you. You know, I'm going to make a little comment here. About 15 years ago, about the time I retired, we didn't have a lot of pulse crops in the northern Great Plains. Today, Kevin, Shannon, Eric, you can jump in and tell us how important pulse crops are for the economy of Montana and North Dakota.
Well, I guess I can start. Yeah, you're right, Jack. You know, in 2003, there was hardly any acreage devoted to those crops, and now you see them fully integrated into crop rotations. from an economic standpoint, I think there are a couple things. The first thing is just the ability to diversify. So if you have commodities, if you're growing wheat, for example, having some commodities that are uncorrelated to some of those wheat markets allows you to diversify a bit, sell into some different markets so that if those wheat markets, something happens to those wheat markets, they fall apart, you have some other commodities. And, we've seen sort of the expansion of these crops to grow in a lot of different areas. Shannon mentioned both domestic and international. And then something I'm interested to hear Kevin talk about is just the ability to use these pulses in these rotations and just to increase the soil quality and increase the yields with other crops as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
Shannon.
that's a very good point, Eric, that the pulse crops do serve a very important role in crop rotations and allowing producers to take the benefit not only of having a crop that, like you say, diversifies their operation, but also provides some additional nitrogen and soil benefits to the subsequent crops that follow in that rotation.
Shannon, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, actually, Montana is ranked #1 for production of pulses across the U.S. Currently, between Montana and North Dakota, more than 75% of all the production in the United States comes from this region. So we play an extremely important role in pulses in both, international and domestic markets coming from the United States.
All right, thank you. Before we get back to pulses, Mary, this question came in from Bozeman, and their tomatoes are rotten on the bottom. Any clue what might be happening?
Highly likely to be blossom and rot. I get it in my garden every spring and probably every fall. It's due to inconsistent watering, so mulch or landscape fabric helps a lot in keeping that watering consistent. It's actually a calcium deficiency, but our soils have enough calcium in them.
I have always had that issue too. And they say, if you cut back on water a little bit, you'll push the tomatoes to ripen. But when you do that, you're going to get blossom end rot. If it's not too bad, folks, you can cut the bottom off and it works fine. Before we get back to pulses, Mary, if we can get a photo or a close-up picture, Mary made some hummus. And I'll tell you what, it's absolutely delicious. And Mary, tell us how you make hummus.
Oh, it's pretty easy, Jack. You just take some tahini, which you can buy in stores. It's a sesame paste. These chickpeas I instant potted. They're from the Huntley Research Station. And then some salt, lemon juice, olive oil, and a little water. And people use blender or Cuisinart to blend it up, and it is tasty.
Okay. Folks, we're getting a lot of insect questions tonight and also some weed questions. Right now, we don't have a specialist on the panel this week. Next week and the following week, we'll be able to answer your entomology questions, so go ahead and send them in. We will also have people to address your weed issues. So keep the questions coming. If you have questions about anything else, send it in and we'll try to get it on maybe next week or the following week. Eric, question from Custer. Are export volumes impacted by tariffs, and they're referring to the pulse crops? We've had a lot of new tariffs on various different crops. How about the pulses?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of what we produce in Montana is exported. Primarily, India is kind of our biggest market. And so you hear a lot about the China tariffs, but the Indian tariffs really hurt pulses across the board in 2017 when they implemented tariffs on some of the U.S. exports, mainly as an effort to protect their home industries. And so, we saw prices drop immediately. Other tariffs you can see, I mentioned the China tariffs, those haven't had as much of an impact on Montana. Those primarily had an impact on soybean and hog production. In Montana, we do export, wheat to China. We were starting to export some beef products to China, but those, are relatively small. But certainly the pulse industry with the Indian tariffs, it really affected them in a major way.
Okay, thank you. Shannon, a question from Culbertson. Does the Northern Pulse Growers Association work with researchers at MSU and NDSU, North Dakota State University, and for that matter, anywhere else?
Absolutely. We're very fortunate in this region to have the expertise of the researchers that we do. There's a lot of collaboration that's done between Montana State University, North Dakota State University, and USDA ARS. And so we try to, get grower feedback to help prioritize what may be some of their issues and some of the things that we've been seeing out in the fields, and then to communicate that back to the researchers. And then each year, the Northern Pulse Growers Association and the U.S. Dry Pea and Little Council have a call for research proposals. So we're able to, go through the proposals that are submitted, match them up with the priorities of the region's producers, the U.S. producers, and then we are awarding them funding for the upcoming crop year to help with some of the challenges that the producers face.
Okay, Kevin, you want to add to that? You've been both in NDSU and MSU.
Yeah, and all I can say is that I'm very grateful for the support that the Northern Pulse growers and the industry as a whole, producers in Montana and North Dakota provide not only to myself, but to other researchers as well. The funding that they provide to my program is crucial, and I guess it kind of directs the program, what we do, what we're trying to accomplish. And I've, over the years, again, just been very grateful to have that support and look forward to that continuing in the future.
Okay, thank you. A little thing I'd like to ask myself is, does the Northern Pulse Growers Association interact with any of the Canadian pulse growers, either positively or negatively? Canada has always been a big pulse producer. Is there a relationship with Canada now?
Yes, I believe that, the U.S. Dry Pea and Little Council has actually worked on marketing over the past 2 years. And in fact, in 2016, when we had the International Year of the Pulses, which the year following was a huge bump in acres in Montana as a direct result of, all of that marketing. That was a joint collaboration between the Canadian pulse industry and the U.S. industry. And certainly we have seen some of the researchers as well, sharing ideas, collaborating. We have had their researchers attend some of our educational events in both Montana and North Dakota. So there's certainly some collaborations there and some sharing of input and ideas. So.
Thank you. I think we have to give Canada some credit because they got us interested in pulse production some years back. Kevin, I'll let you answer this. This caller is from Bozeman. He would like to know the origins of the word pulse and why is it used to refer to these crops.
So pulse is a term that's used to refer to a soup mix or to a soup preparation, and it's also used to refer to seeds or crops where the seeds are harvested from a pod. So that's the definition, I guess, behind the term pulse and how it's used with reference to our crops that we work with, peas, lentils, chickpeas. There are others that are also included. Another part of that definition is that they are edible seeds. So oftentimes soybean, as an example, often produced for the oils and for other purposes, is not included as a pulse because they're not consumed or eaten directly. Whereas peas, lentils, chickpeas, beans, those are considered to be pulse crops.
Okay, thank you. So where does edamame fit into that? I love edamame, and that's an edible soybean. Would that be a pulse crop or not?
It's not.
That's more of a vegetable. It's the pulse often refers to a mature dried seed that's consumed as opposed to a fresh product.
One of the Canadians described it as non-greasy legumes.
Okay. That works. Mary, while you're up, this person from Bozeman has several choke cherries, and every year when they lose their leaves, he sees a lot of black knots or galls on them. Do you have any idea what that is?
That's how you tell it's a cherry.
Yeah, that's true.
It's called black knot. It's a fungus. And to manage it, you could cut it out, just prune it out. But it's very common in cherry. You'll see wild cherries with it as well.
Okay. Eric, from Helena, what Montana commodities have been most affected by the trade issues with China?
Well, good question. So, I guess just to go back, the China tariffs were implemented sort of strategically on crops that we sent a lot of over to China. The two kind of main crops included soybeans and pork that we were sending over there. And so when the US government had a program to compensate some of those farmers for some of the tariffs that China implemented, they primarily went to hog and soybean producers. In the second iteration, kind of because that lasted a couple of years and is still in existence today, they kind of opened up the net a little bit more and realized that, a lot of other crops were impacted. So things like cotton, peanuts, also wheat, and some of the lentils. So, I mentioned lentils. India is a big market there, but there are some pulses that go through China and had some impact. And so, by now it's hard to find an industry that isn't at least a little bit impacted by the Chinese tariffs.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to throw this one to Kevin, then I have one for Shannon that has come in. Can pulse crops be good crops to use to rotate fields instead of letting it go to fallow? Kevin, you want to jump on that? And Mary,
sure,
too?
I guess so one of the things to consider with that, as far as the reason behind fallow, was to conserve moisture for subsequent crops. So the moisture level that is available or is present in that particular area where those fields that we might be referring to will play a role in that. But in many cases, the pulse crops are quite water efficient. They use the water more efficiently than other crops or some other crops. So they provide an opportunity to not drain the soil of the stored moisture. They will use some, of course, to produce the crop that that is planted, but there will be moisture left, especially at the deeper soil zones where the roots of the pulse crops don't explore. Yet that also allows the producer to have a crop every year, so they can annual crop as opposed to leaving the field fallow and having income from that field every other year. So they do fit quite well in that regard to remove or to offer an opportunity or an alternative to the fallow rotation period.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to ask Mary, from a pest perspective, is it a good crop to include in your rotation?
Yeah, I think they're an excellent crop to include in your rotation. The problem we run into is when you get the rotation of the pulses, especially peas and lentil, too close. So you want to go every third or fourth year with those because of the diseases accumulating, and that allows the stubble to degrade and lowers your disease risk.
Okay, thank you. Shannon, back to you. This question came in from Butte. Has the use of high-protein beans and lentils, peas, so forth and so on, increased as more people are cooking at home? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes, it was interesting during the pandemic. We actually saw a lot of product moving off of store shelves as people were moving more towards staple foods to put into their pantry. So there was a significant amount of beans, peas, lentils, chickpeas that moved off of store shelves during that time. And even prior to, and I know that Eric alluded to this too, that we had some issues with our exports to India. We had seen quite a significant drop off of our markets even before, the pandemic happened to show up. And so, we were experiencing some significant market drops even prior to this, but it was so interesting to watch how the domestic consumption increased during that time. And it'll be interesting to see how, when the numbers actually come out, after we move beyond this bump in the road, to see exactly how much consumption was increased in the domestic markets.
No, I think they're going to stay in people's diets because they're so tasty and so good for you.
I sure enjoy them. And
Yeah.
I would say I've cooked more with pulses over the last 6 months than I did prior to that.
Yeah, and there's great recipes on both the Northern Pulse Growers and the U.S. Dry Pea and Lentil websites.
And I'm told there's a great cookbook that comes out from the Northern Pulse Growers.
is. There are several.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to give us that address, we'll try to get it up on the screen.
My favorite, though, is lentil cheesecake.
Lentil cheesecake.
Yeah.
Why didn't we get some lentil cheesecake tonight?
I had to Instant Pot the chickpeas. We're lucky to have the hummus.
This is an interesting question. I'll throw it at Eric, but maybe Shannon can add to it. A caller from Bozeman is interested in the outlook for pulse futures, and I'm assuming it would be like wheat futures, corn futures. Is there any indication that this may happen in the future?
Well, that's, one of the issues with growing a pulse crop is that a lot of them do not have a futures market. And so if you are growing wheat in Montana, you have a futures market. And, these markets were developed a long time ago so that producers could move risk, because if you're a farmer, you don't want risk. But if you're, say, a university professor, maybe you need a little more risk in your life. And so the farmer could transfer that risk to someone who wants to take it on. And so we had these futures markets, and not only do they allow farmers to get rid of risk, but they also allow for the wheat producers to, I guess in a different way, pulse producers do not have that same luxury of the futures market. So they often rely on what's called a forward contract, where they have to go to an elevator or go to a buyer ahead of time and agree on a price and kind of settle in on there. I guess I was gonna say the other thing with the futures market that you can get is we have a good idea of what the prices are. So in the wheat market, we see prices moving every day. With the pulse market, we have to wait to see how prices kind of move, how sales are going, to kind of get a good idea for those prices.
Okay. But as I understand it, right now, most pulse crops, peas, lentils, chickpeas, are growing under contract, not for an open market sale for the most part. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I don't know, Shannon, you might have some additional insight into that.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. That's my take on that as well. And it does make it difficult without having a futures market for us as an industry as well. Even when you're looking at crop insurance and things like that, it makes it difficult for us to not have that to base, some of these calculations on. So yeah, it's that does make it difficult in our industry.
And just to add on to that, I mean, one I mentioned earlier, one of the nice things about growing pulses is you can use it to diversify, meaning that those crops are unrelated. The prices are unrelated to wheat and corn and some other crops. The downside to that is you can't really use those markets to hedge at all. So a lot of those contracts are really the best way farmers can hedge that risk away.
Okay, thank you. That was a good question. I've got an interesting question I'm going to delay for just a minute because I want to get this one on. This came in last week. I jotted it down. This person from Manhattan has carrots that have lots of little carrots growing on the outside of it. Mary, any idea what that might be?
Well, I have those in my garden too, and I've always attributed it to rocks. And sometimes I've got little pieces of landscape fabric in my garden that I've tilled in, and they grow through that and they get like semi-girdled. So any sort of obstruction will make the carrot move. You always get these little twin carrots. You get all kinds of funny stuff.
I've got the same problem, and if you don't like them, you can just kind of snap them off.
Yeah, they're not great to make sticks out of, but you can do something else with them.
All right. A question from Kalispell. This person would like every member on the panel to tell what their favorite pulse crop meal is. So, Mary, I'll start with you.
Well, I've shared, but there's so many.
Well, you said the
lentil cheesecake, lentil chili, lentil tacos.
Okay, they're all
and
good.
Hummus. Yeah, they're all
the
good.
The hummus is good. Shannon, what about you? What's your favorite?
I really like hummus as well, but we have a lentil brownie that we serve at all of our producer meetings that's very popular. It's actually in our recipe book as well. So I would have to say that one's probably my favorite.
Eric, how about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, hummus and chips. I don't think you can go wrong with hummus and chips. So.
I would agree. It's pretty good.
But what kind of hummus, Eric?
Well, like Mary, I prefer a plainer hummus, maybe with a little bit of spice on it.
Okay. And I know Kevin loves to cook with lentils. So, Kevin, what is your all-time favorite?
Well, actually, if we include all of the pulse crops, I think that chickpeas, and there are a number of different ways that chickpeas can be included in different preparations. There's a couple of things that my wife has prepared with the chickpeas. One is it's a green salad that includes the chickpeas in there. And then the second option that follows very close behind is a hamburger that has ground chickpeas included in it as well. That combination and those two dishes are hard to beat from my perspective.
Yeah, my kids have even had it at school, and they had some like farm to table event, and they had lentil burgers and stuff, and I think they liked them.
Well, Beyond Meat now, and that's basically a
protein.
pulse based. My own, I like lentil elk burger soup with grated carrots in it, garden carrots. So
Next time.
next time, okay, we got it. From Belgrade, this person would like to know what type of research is currently being done throughout the state on pulse crops. And I'll start with Kevin.
Throughout the state, that's a very big question. It's a good question, and I guess I would say that there's quite a range of research topics that are being investigated around the state. Of course, I can start, close to home for me is plant breeding, developing new varieties. I might come back to that, but there's quite a lot of work at several of the research extension centers looking at disease resistance and how to manage various disease challenges in all three crops. Mary is pretty close to the issue, the topic of root diseases, so she can comment more completely maybe on that. But there's a lot of interest in that. There's some agronomy that's being done, looking at trying to figure out if growing flax with chickpeas will benefit or impact the level of Ascochyta blight. Just different ways, rotations, combinations of crops, and how that impacts production, not only of the pulse crop, but again, all other crops in the rotation as well. There's some research that's being done on the quality side as well. Protein is a very hot topic. There's a lot of interest in protein levels within the pulse crops, and this is a relatively new market that's expanding very, very quickly, and it is on the amount of protein, and I think that we're eventually going to move toward the quality of that protein. What is the amino acid composition of those proteins that are being produced, and how does that fit into various product combinations or product mixes that are being made? So there's really quite a wide range of different things that are happening. It's really quite exciting, actually, within the pulse crops and all the things that can be done. And then to circle back around to plant breeding, there's a number of those topics where there is genetic variation within the species that we can use in the breeding program to improve and shift populations or develop lines that are adapted or at least address and in part overcome some of the challenges that are there. And that's what makes it fun for me. I enjoy hearing. I'd like to hear more from some of the end users and companies and specific things that they would like to have. But I think many of them are still developing those specific details themselves as to what they need for their products. But the breeding programs, and mine for sure, we're here waiting to hear some of those details, and then we can put the crop to work and develop improved varieties that address those.
Thanks, Kevin. Mary, you want to jump in on some of your research and what you're doing with pulse crops?
Sure. We are working with all the breeders to develop new varieties with resistance to Fusarium root rot, and that's in Washington, Montana, and North Dakota. And then we're looking at agronomic management practices. Perry Miller's doing that part, including varieties and seed treatments, and looking at just pathogen composition. We just got our soil test results back from Australia this week, which was pretty exciting. And we found all the fields that we could identify as Phantomyces root rot, they could identify it as well. So we feel kind of confident in our methods now.
Okay, diseases have always been a big issue with pulse crops,
Yeah.
and it requires some very stringent management techniques over time. Eric, I got to get this one. I think this is pretty funny. From Haver, this person is just curious what kind of research ag economists do other than guessing at future economic activity.
Well, I hit it on the nose. I mean, 90% of the time, that's what we're doing. But the other 10%, a lot of what we do is we support the field, research that Kevin and Mary were talking about. So on a lot of those, grants, oftentimes they'll ask for an interdisciplinary approach where you have an economist who's kind of looking to see, the costs and the benefits of different things. Traditionally, we've focused on, risk management, marketing, the impact on policy with all products in Montana, so pulses, wheat, and beef. And then recently, we brought in a couple people I think are particularly well suited to look and apply what they're doing to the pulse market. One of them, Dr. Haggerty, looks at water markets and the usage of water in cropping systems. And then also Dr. Young, who looks at food systems, which for pulse crops is especially important. And we're kind of seeing, like with coronavirus, one of the big impacts on agriculture was on the supply chain. So looking at how to make a more efficient supply chain and how to get to consumers what they're looking for, I think are kind of, when we're not just shooting darts at a board, those are the kind of things that we're doing.
Okay, thank you. I'll throw this one to Shannon, but anybody else can jump in. A Glendive caller in eastern Montana would like to know, is there support for dry edible bean producers here in Montana? And he also says, or they also say, the caller likes the ability to stream the show and enjoys getting our newsletter. And I'll put in a plug. You contact Ag Live on PBS, and we do have a newsletter that comes out. So if you're interested in that, get on board and you can sign up for it. Back to the question. Shannon?
I would assume that there is opportunity for beans to be grown in Montana. I'm not as familiar with beans, so I'm not exactly sure what regions would probably be best suited. That's probably a question for Kevin or Mary. But certainly the opportunity has to be there, and we've seen a lot of production in North Dakota as well. So.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit of dry edible bean in the Yellowstone Valley. And one of the companies was actually trying to get seed production going around Shoto, but I don't know where that went.
Okay, we've grown beans here in Montana since I've been here in the late 70s. And the acres do go up and down, and that's based on Eric's economic issues. Sometimes beans are worth a lot, and it depends a lot on Mexico. They like our pinto beans and Great Northerns. Kevin, a caller from Whitefish knows of 4 kinds of lentils. He thinks the French green has higher protein. Is that true? Also, are all 4 types grown here in Montana?
So 4 types. There's at least that many types. And as far as the protein levels across the various market classes, from the data that I have, and I have not seen data on French greens in Montana as far as production, and certainly not for protein levels. So I'm not familiar with the amount of protein that's produced or is present in French greens compared to some of the others. Across the market classes, the small reds, medium, large, and small greens, Pardinas, some of the others, the data that I've seen, they're all relatively close to the same. And it would maybe depend on the field that it's being produced in or a particular variety as to whether there is more or not. But the data that I've seen or the lack thereof I don't have a good solid answer for that particular question.
What is the average protein in, say, lentils and, say, dry peas? Roughly, where does that level sit?
You know, it ranges from year to year and from locations. On average, it's in the 22 to 24 range. Once in a while, we'll see a number up at the 26. In some years, we'll see numbers down around 20 or even the high teens. So there is quite a range depending on conditions, but really the average is in that 22 to 24% range.
Yeah, Perry Miller's been working quite a bit on protein levels and pulses, and also NDSU, ARS there.
It's pretty high relative to a lot of other foods.
It is.
Yeah, and it's very digestible protein.
Yep.
As
Put
I
some
understand.
lentils in with your rice next time.
Okay. And Mary, while you're up, the viewer would like you to repeat the recipe that you mentioned at the beginning of the program. It was a pulse crop recipe.
Just go to google.com and you can probably find something.
Okay. And this came up a couple weeks ago. Bozeman caller is concerned about the predicted freeze tonight. So am I. My tomatoes are covered. I hope it makes it, or they do. She would like to know if she should harvest her pumpkins or just the ones showing color. And what Cheryl said was, once you harvest the pumpkins, they're not going to change color. So they will tolerate 28, 29 degrees. So I think I just leave them in the garden. Bozeman caller noticed that just today a news story dealt with the increase in pulse crops in pet and dog food. I knew this question would come up. Shannon, this has been theoretically linked to some heart diseases in dogs. It's hurt the pulse market. It's not been proven. You want to touch on that a little bit?
Certainly. There were, this was actually about a year and a half ago, there was some news reports that had surfaced with some comments that had been made from FDA in regards to, and it was in regards to grain-free diets. And it just happened that some of the pet foods that they had been looking at actually included peas, lentils, and chickpeas as well. I believe potatoes were included as well. And so really what we've been doing as an industry is, delving into that, conducting some research, looking into whether there actually is any substantial evidence to back that, because there has been no research done to date to say that it does or does not, contribute to that issue. So this is certainly that did affect our industry overnight. I mean, this was something that was announced on a Friday, and by Monday, Tuesday, we saw movement in the markets that, there was customers that were saying that they did not want to include pulses in their pet food formulations. And that was basically something that went viral, with consumers. And again, this was something that has not yet been, it's not based on science at this point. And so, we're hoping that we'll be able to, as an industry, be able to step forward on this and see actually what is taking place. And it will, in the end, hopefully come out, with our strong pet food market again. That really was a significant impact to both Montana and North Dakota, because that was a pretty big market for us. And unfortunately, again, this happened right when we had our issues with our India tariffs. And so, producers are probably really wondering what happened to their prices and their markets as of late. And it was kind of just a snowball effect of one thing happening on top of another. So we're hoping there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's a lot of opportunities for us in the pulse industry. One of the things that when we were talking about research earlier too, I wanted to mention there's a lot of value added research that's done on flours and proteins and starches. We're seeing significant amount of food ingredients that are including pulses as well. So there's a really bright future ahead for pulse crops.
I agree with you entirely. They're neat. Eric, question from Cascade. On last week's program, this person heard a bit about the coronavirus food assistance program. Could you tell me more about that and how it has impacted Montana agriculture?
Yeah, so in response to, I mean, when coronavirus first started, we saw the supply disruptions. We saw sort of run on, some food products, and a big shift from at home away from, I guess, what we call away from home consumption. Less people eating at restaurants, more people eating at home. And so to compensate for those losses, which really, farmers did nothing to do, they introduced the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. And what they did is the USDA Office of the Chief Economist estimated the losses in different markets. And one of the markets that experienced the biggest loss in terms of price was the cattle market. And so in Montana, I think it's like 86% of the payments from that program have gone to cattle producers in the state. And if you look at prices, the prices dropped immediately. And so a lot of it's gone nationally, cattle producers, also hog producers and dairy producers, as well as some corn producers getting some funds from that. But then last week, they introduced the second round of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which casts a much wider net and will include a lot more products. So, a lot of the pulses are included in that program. Cattle is also, although not breeding cattle, there are some crops that are not, but, besides animal feed and breeding stock, basically almost all the commodities in Montana are covered under this next Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. And you have from now until December 11th to sign up for that program.
Okay, out of curiosity, this person from Cascade would also like to know how do they divvy out per cow the amount of money, and roughly how much money per cow, or however you look at it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the Office of the Chief Economist has, they estimate the disturbance in the prices. So basically they try to estimate, well, what would the prices look like if coronavirus never happened? And then what are we seeing now? And based on that, they have a payment rate. And then it also depends on how much you've marketed. So for example, if you set a contract, let's say you were back in December and you set a marketing contract, you set your price, well, then the idea is that you wouldn't really feel any of this price declines because you've already set your price. If you right now are looking for a cash price, obviously you would have felt a lot of that. And so there's the amount of the product that they've already marketed, and then there's also the payment rate, and then you could take how much production that they made. There were some estimates actually by the American Farm Bureau. They estimated about $20 per acre for wheat and about $27 for barley. I know they haven't done the same for pulses, but they kind of they estimate the potential damages and try to allocate it out that way.
Okay, December 11th. If you're interested, you have to sign up by then. Where do you sign up?
So you go to it's through the FSA, and actually you can go online. If you just go to farmers.gov/CFAP, that's CFAP, then you can register online there.
Can my tomato crop qualify in my garden? Probably not, huh?
I mean, tomatoes qualify. I don't know if you'd be a commercial producer, but you could try.
Yeah, thank you. Shannon, this question comes in from Ramsey, and I think this is the first question we've ever had from Ramsey. How does the Northern Pulse Growers Association increase market opportunities? How would you function in doing such a thing?
Well, in the region, of course, we do a lot with consumers. And, it's kind of the conversations that we were having earlier, like what do you do with pulses? What are the different recipes that you can use? Those types of things. Mary mentioned that, it's really easy to throw them in an Instapot. And so we're trying to get that kind of information out to our region. It's amazing how many people don't realize the amount of production of pulses in this region. And, it still comes down to folks really don't know what to do with them. So providing them with enough recipes, whether it's, the breakdowns on substitutions. I know you mentioned and others had mentioned about using these as blended products. And there's a lot of opportunity for consumers to use that. We've also been doing some work in the school systems to try to get kids more interested in pulses. Of course, they're the consumers of the future. And so, as we work on doing those things, we've done some supermarket in-store where we have had products that they can test. We've had recipes that we hand out, as well as making them aware of what types of products are located in their local grocery stores that have pulses in the ingredients and that are available for purchase. So, and then on the international side, we work with the U.S. Dry Pea and Little Council. They will host trade missions through the region, and so we help coordinate that. Sometimes that's visits to producers' farms, sometimes that's visits to processors. But we do what we can to make sure that we're marketing the quality product, in particular that Montana and North Dakota have.
Thank you. Excellent. I'm going to throw one at Mary, and then Kevin, I got a couple coming up for you here. Do cover crops increase the amount of disease in pulse? And this, again, came from eastern Montana near Glendive.
Okay, so cover crops are a crop you would plant in your fallow or to increase your organic matter. Sometimes people plant them as a forage, and often there are peas mixed into that mix. There's a number of researchers looking at whether they would increase your risk of disease, but I think it probably all depends on the proportion that you have in the mix. So if there's a few peas here and there, it's not probably going to do much, but you wouldn't want it to be 50% peas.
I think usually most cover crops have 6, 7, 8 different, and it is expanding. We'll probably get into cover crops again because the acres in the state are increasing, and of course the interest in cover crops has really increased.
Yeah, they have a good fit in some places, I think.
You got to have some moisture.
Yeah.
They definitely do. Kevin, back to you now. This caller from Havre would like to know, is it possible for home gardeners to grow any pulse crops if they have a couple acres of land? Have at it.
Well, I think that the answer would be yes. It would be a matter of being able to establish those crops on that land that they're thinking about, or that they have an interest in producing the pulse crop on. If you're looking at a couple of acres, I think your producers would be wise to consider all the various aspects that larger producers would. So 2 acres versus 250 acres, it can have the same issues present. So as long as they're able to get the crop, the seeds in the ground, get it established, and be able to have the care of the crop while it's in production, they shouldn't have a problem at all. I think it would work just fine.
Sounds like a lot of work to me to shell it out and everything, where you could go to town and get a bag of chickpeas or a bag of lentils much easier.
Yeah, but there's also some value or some pride maybe in being able to produce your own. So I think there's a lot of value in that, and certainly quite worthy of doing.
I agree. From Carter, well, I have you up. This person would like to know, and he's heard about winter legumes, winter pulses. What's the current status of the winter breeding program for pulse crops?
Okay, that's actually a very timely question. So last Thursday, we finished planting our winter nursery here at Bozeman. A year ago, we weren't able to establish it because of the wet conditions and the lateness in the season that it turned out to be. But this year, we were able to get the nurseries established and planted, like I say, last Thursday. The status of the program is that we're now able to evaluate the first selections from the breeding program from the populations that I began developing when I first started 3.5 years ago now. It's time flies. But I'm pretty happy that we have selections. Some of these we've not had an opportunity to evaluate in the winter. As far as the selections themselves, the populations that they're derived from We've had an opportunity the last 3 years to evaluate those at Havre for 2 years, Conrad and Huntley, and had success at all three of those locations, as well as here at Bozeman, one of those years, and we were able to make selections from those populations of lines that survived. So we had great survival, a good differential survival of the populations, which gives me some comfort that what we are harvesting has some merit and an opportunity or ability to survive the winters here in Montana. Didn't necessarily expect them to survive as well as they did in the Havre and Conrad area, but they certainly proved me wrong, pleasantly so. And we've got those selections increased, and though we may not be able to screen them this winter, we'll increase those and likely be able to produce or have those available for evaluation a year from now. So the program is alive and well. We're making progress and moving toward having some answers as to whether we'll have winter peas, edible winter peas, not just the Austrian types that are typically used for forage and for other purposes, but to have edible peas that can be produced in Montana on a regular basis. That regular basis is where the questions come in as to whether producers want to give them a try or not, but we're doing our best.
Sounds good. From Missoula, while we're on this subject, this person would like to know, is chickpea flour gluten-free?
Is chickpea flour gluten-free? The answer to that is yes.
Okay, and you can bake with chickpea flour, correct?
You can. There are some recipes that use chickpea flour solely, but there are a number of other ones where you can use a blend of chickpeas with the cereal grain flours for various products. But I've enjoyed some chickpea pasta that's 100% chickpea flour. That's really quite tasty. I very much enjoyed those. So it's a great product.
Okay, thank you. From Columbia Falls, this caller is curious about the amount of production of Sandpoint in Montana, and is it a good cattle feed? And I'm going to put that off to next week when we have John Grande, who is with Stock Growers Association. So stay tuned next week. We'll have an answer for you there. Shannon, this call came in from Sydney. They would like to know any other effects that the pandemic has had on pulse production.
Like I said, other than we seem to have some really positive effects, as far as consumers within the domestic sector. We have had some issues internationally, certainly with logistics. That's probably been our biggest issue at this point. And then, of course, we have a lot of producer education that we do. So, I can say that that's definitely affected the way that we communicate with our growers. So certainly we will be having Montana Pulse Day coming up in November and at Great Falls, but that will be done according to any of the COVID restrictions that we need to have. And so we've been really moving towards doing more online, doing more webinars, Facebook Lives, those types of things to help educate our producers. So overall, we have had some impacts on how we do things here. We've had some impacts in the industry, but certainly not as extensive as what maybe some have faced.
Okay. Quick question from Columbia Falls. They wonder if pulse crops would be a suitable protein for protein shakes. I think it's used in them.
I think it is. And
Yeah.
I think you can put lentils in your shakes. Like you can just make some lentils, throw them in the freezer, and put them in your shake.
I think a lot of people are doing that. Yeah. So the answer to that is yes. I love to throw questions at economists when we only have a little bit of time left. But from Shodel, this person would like to know what you perceive as the future of agriculture and land values in the next few years.
In the next few years, well, I guess the short answer is, the markets have calmed down a lot since the beginning of the pandemic, and really just with all the trade disruptions. I think the volatility has calmed down. A lot of the near-term farm forecasts show, above normal income levels, although I think a lot of farmers, see the proportion from these farm programs as being too high, and they much prefer to just have better sales and less government intervention. But gosh, land values, I don't know much about that. But yeah, I would just say the near term, looks, I guess, more of the same. Maybe not a lot of volatility is projected in there.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank the panel members for being here tonight, especially Shannon. Shannon, it's good you could join us from Bismarck. Next week, we're going to have John Grande, who is the Executive Vice President of Montana Stock Growers Association. Join us at that time. Mary, a quick comment here. You're supposed to put garlic in your hummus.
I did.
Okay,
I forgot
she
that
did.
ingredient.
So, folks, thank you for joining us. Join us next week. You'll learn a lot about livestock production in the state of Montana. Meanwhile, stay safe, have a good week, and social distance. Good night.
MontanPBS.org/AgLive. Montana Ag Live is made possible by the Montana Department of Agriculture, the MSU Extension Service, the MSU Ag Experiment Stations of the College of Agriculture, the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, the Montana Bankers Association, Cashman Nursery and Land